everybody, and welcome to the Rural Youth Forum. And we're discussing this evening, what is the future, well, this evening in Scotland, what is the future of rural areas without young people? My name's Jane Craigie and I'm your chair for this evening. I run a rural marketing business in the northeast of Scotland, employ young people and live on a small holding. And I also run a project which we started 3 years ago called the Rural Youth Project, which is focused on developing leadership, activism and enterprise skills amongst young people aged 18 to 28 years old. Over the last 3 years, we've been doing a number of things. We've conducted a lot of research internationally with young people. We've run ideas festivals. We're funded by LEADER, and we've been doing a lot of story seeking and telling from around the world, sharing of ideas. And a lot of us on this panel have met through the Rural Youth Project. And one of the things that really spurred us to setting up this project was the migration of young people away from rural areas and the loss of energy and ideas and services that result as a result of young people leaving. And the COVID pandemic has exacerbated that situation. And governments are getting increasingly worried about the high dependency ratio of older people in rural areas. And so really this evening is about discussing what we can do to reverse that, to allow young people to be heard more, to be more active in local decision making. And I'm just going to share a few points from the research we've done over the last few years, which I hope will give a little bit of context and maybe information to inform the debate. The key things, as we would imagine, housing, digital and physical connectivity and isolation are the things that are troubling many young people and policymakers around the world. Yet from our research, there are some positives. So 80% of young people say that they live rurally because of emotional connections and attachments, which is positive. And despite COVID, the level of optimism about their futures in rural areas has diminished, yet people don't want to move to a city. In fact, it's the opposite. They want to remain living rurally. Worryingly, only 13% of young people feel that they have a say in their local community, which I know is shared the world over. And digital connectivity is absolutely vital. Another big positive is that young people feel that if they can work for a cool, value-driven business, it can be incredibly powerful and it will encourage them to stay in rural places and to forego income just for the lifestyle and to work for a values-driven organization. COVID has been troubling, as we all know. There's been significant job losses for many young people. The increase in loneliness and worry about the future is underpinning a lot of mental health issues. And there's a big call from youth-led organizations for governments to support mental health and to invest in the resilience that we need to rebuild communities post-COVID. One positive that I've seen through our project is that there've been a number of people, young people, that have seen COVID as a catalyst to fast forward their decisions to set up their own businesses. So there are a lot of negatives, but also the resilience and the energy of young people, which you'll see from our panelists this evening, can be a real catalyst for good, positive change. I'm going to hand over to Russ Carrington, who is in England. So it is 9 p.m. with us here. Russ works with Regenerative Farming Network, and he's a real champion for rural youth and has had a number of roles within that discipline, including chairing the Rural Youth Europe, and along with Fionn Storer-Jones, who's also on the panel this evening, they co-founded the European Rural Youth Forum to facilitate greater connections across youth organisations working in policy and leadership So Russ, if you could tell us a little bit more about what you've been doing, that would be great.
Yes, thank you very much, Jane, and good evening, everybody. It's great to be here and great to be bringing together this forum. I just wanted to contextualize this evening's session and explaining a little bit about what the European Rural Youth Forum is. And I'm just going to quickly share my screen, which I hope you can all see. Please shout if not, and quickly explain what is the Rural Youth Forum. Well, it was only 13 months ago that Fionn and I actually met, and here we are one very chilly December morning, quickly climbing a mountain in the south part of Scotland to see the sunrise. And we were there because we were attending one of the Rural Youth Project's Ideas Festival, which Jane was a key part of organising. And that festival was a real melting pot of young people and energy and new ideas and wanting to do things differently for the future. And Fionn and I immediately hit things off and had a shared passion for making a difference. And so we were so motivated by this early morning climb to see the sunrise, which was a really memorable occasion. But we were both very motivated to bring about change, and we could see that other young people like ourselves and others that attended the youth festival, the Ideas Festival, and are here with us watching tonight as well, that we weren't really happy with the way things were going from the young people's perspective. And we felt that there was more need for nurturing leadership skills to develop and implement solutions for the future. We really saw that new skills would be needed to address the challenges of young people during young people's lives. And we saw that we really had to empower young people to do that, and taking much inspiration from the likes of Greta Thunberg and others around the world speaking up for young people. So we were very lucky to be able to get an opportunity to very quickly, within 5 weeks of first meeting, to pull together a meeting in Brussels, kindly supported by Tom Jones, who's a member of the European Economic and Social Committee. And we really centred in on Brussels because we felt it was a good place where there was a lot of policy being discussed, lots of activity, where we could bring together key organisations to talk about the future of rural youth. And we were blown away by the level of interest by 15 or 16 organisations that wanted to be part of this conversation. These organisations were struggling to engage with rural youth. They didn't know how to deal with rural youth. They didn't know how to empower them, to help them bring about the solutions we need, whether that be in managing the land or producing food or implementing other new activities for the future. And we really brought together a great group of people. And we continue now as a group having a dialogue as a sort of international forum, bringing together ideas. And Fionn and I really informally just helping to facilitate conversations and joining dots, because this is something we feel needs talking about more. And so that's what's brought us really to this evening. And so we're very grateful for the opportunity to have this platform with the Oxford Rural Farming Conference to continue this important dialogue for the future of rural youth and how that will impact the future of our countryside, the future and sustainability of food production and land management. So that's it from me very briefly. I'm not going to specifically be a panelist this evening, but we'll be chipping in from time to time. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Russ. And also on our panel this evening, we have Fionn. So Russ has just mentioned Fionn and showed a picture of them on top of a mountain. Fionn currently splits her time between Brussels and her family's farm in mid-Wales, working on a number of projects and programs from Fair Trade, she's a great ambassador for Fair Trade and has been for many years, to global health and civic space. And she's recently undertaken a research project which she'll update us a little bit about on the needs and the aspirations of young rural people in Wales. She's passionate about connecting people, places, issues and opportunities. We also have on the panel Anja from Slovenia. She's recently been elected as Vice President of the European Youth Forum, and she's the former President and Vice President of the National Youth Council of Slovenia, and a former board member of the Slovenian Rural Youth Association. And we have DJ from the Netherlands. He's a traveller, a connector, and an innovator. He is a graduate of agriculture and entrepreneurship, which is an interesting combination in itself, from the Haas University in the Netherlands. And he's such an innovative, different thinker, and you'll see that from what he says later. And his mantra is think global, act local. And we have Anna from Argentina, and Anna is a sociologist and has been working for Coopsol, a fair trade cooperative for beekeepers in the north of Argentina. She works on projects to apply technology, connectivity, and to improve organic honey traceability systems via blockchain. And Anna will no doubt fill us in more on what happens, but she works with a lot of indigenous people in the forests in the north of Argentina. So the way we're going to run this evening is there won't be any formal presentations. So if you'd like to post your questions, we will make this an informal discussion. And at the end, Russ is going to summarize some of what so it's not an easy task, Russ, but he's going to summarize what we discussed during this evening. And if there's any interest, we'd be very happy to book a meeting room for over the next few days, sometime in the next few days, to meet again if anybody would like to. So please post that into the chat if you would like that. So I'm going to ask the first question while we wait for you as our delegates to post what you would like to ask the panel. And my first is, will the pandemic drive more young people to rural places, do you think? And how will this affect the communities in your countries? And I'm going to start with Anya.
Hi, everyone. First, thank you for inviting me. It's really an honor to be here and to share my knowledge, experience, and my passion for the topic of young people in rural areas. Yeah, the question, will the pandemics bring more young people to rural areas? Not immediately, but I do believe that when businesses will go online even more, and when, you know, this kind of systems on how you can do remote work will be even kind of more expanded and more strengthened, then more young people will see the need to, or the possibility to go back to rural areas. Because for now, the biggest issue of why young people are leaving rural areas is the lack of quality employment in rural areas. So once the quality employment is brought back to rural areas, either with remote work or with establishing companies in rural areas, or with, you know, doing different activities where people can have a quality labor market in rural areas, then young people in rural areas, either the ones that are coming from rural areas or even the ones that were brought up in urban areas, will see this as an opportunity. So I think it's not the COVID that will bring young people to rural areas. It will be broader digitalization. And one of the key things that needs to be done then is to have a quality broadband, so internet connectivity as well, connectivity with bigger cities, places, so that people are able to still maintain this aspect of their lives when they are with people, but still have their own space in rural areas.
Thank you, Anya. Fionn, you were nodding a lot during that. I wonder if you would like to add your thoughts.
Yeah, I agree with everything Anya said. That this shift in the way we're working definitely opens up opportunity to bring jobs back to rural areas. I think there's a note of caution. I've been speaking with a number of young people as part of my research project recently, and there's a sense of fear that young people themselves won't be the ones to benefit from this shift to working from home and working more rurally. And I think there needs to be quite fast action to be building systems of support and opportunities that allow young people to benefit from this shift in working. Many mentioned the need for apprenticeships and the want to be doing different work. It's very interesting to hear young people talk about jobs in rural areas, but they don't see their careers in rural areas. So a breadth of decent jobs is something that is desperately needed in rural areas. Talking of retaining, but also attracting, recent survey commissioned by the CLA, the Countryside Land and Business Association, I believe, showed that 1 in 2 young people in London wanted to move to a rural area as a result of the pandemic. And so I think there's real opportunity in bringing vital young blood to rural areas, but a note of caution in doing it well and doing it in a way that is sustainable and brings benefit in the long term.
And Fee, on the second point about how will communities respond to maybe new people coming into rural areas, and do you see any conflict there?
Oh, putting me in the hot seat. I think we've seen an incredible sense of community across the world. I think it's very easy to look at division. I was reading a great piece today about how divided we've come, and we tend to look at the divided nature of our society. Meanwhile, there's lots of growth in communal action, in thinking as we rather than I. And I think young people have been some of the people that have been really driving that change. So in my survey, it showed that over 70% of the young people currently or have volunteered in their rural area. I don't think we really cannot underestimate the actions of young people in driving this change. Young people, be they urban or rural, I think are of a more values-based approach to life, to work. And I really think that our generation, and I really hope that we set a precedent that we are about different mindsets, about different people working together. And therefore, I think there's really an opportunity for this shift to create more diverse, more welcoming rural communities.
Yeah, it's a great answer. And Anna, in Latin America, how do you think that the pandemic will drive more people to rural places? And how will the communities respond?
La verdad que un poco en comparación a lo que contaban mis compañeras.
If we compare it to what my colleagues were saying, in my opinion, our rural areas have received this migration with a faster pace. Actually, there was a kind of thrill to move to the city. It was an obsession, but there is a segment of society that has a different mindset. Maybe we're talking about middle class, upper class, and they do need to change their relationship to nature. Maybe it's related to mental health, to leisure, or some rights that should belong to everyone. And they are in touch with peasants and small farmers. It is not real, that relationship. And I need to be honest about this. But I do believe that, as Anya was mentioning, there's going to be a tendency to revalue rural areas as spaces that can offer us a different relationship to nature. But in the north of Argentina and other places in Latin America, the needs are kind of dramatic, to put it this way.
Yeah, that's very interesting, that point about it's not real. And DJ, how do you feel about what the impact of the pandemic will be about migration?
I would say it depends where our focus goes. So nobody has a clear picture of the future. We have some ideas, but I think if we focus on the lack, so we focus on people leaving, that's what's going to happen. For change, we always look outside. So we see, how can I change something that's outside me? But real change happens from a shift inside, shift in focus. Where my attention goes, energy flows. If my attention, my focus shifts towards creativity to questions that empower, that and stimulate that inspiration. So how can we, what's next, what else is there in the world, how can we nourish our environment or facilitate our environment that suits our need as human being, our needs for growth, our need for contribution, our need for connection with each other and several others. If we focus on that, that's what, by every individual, that's where we push things. So if you ask me, it depends on where our focus goes. But what I see in the Netherlands more and more, also during this pandemic, there is this recognition, this awareness, this sense of kind of an emptiness inside in a lot of people in urban areas, that they feel they want something that's more fulfilled. And so they try to, so there's a lot of thinking about new ways of living, and I think rural area has the place to provide that, and can really get an up level therefore. And also people, we tend to remember again that we are not separated from nature. We thought for a long time that you have nature and animals and plants, and then you have humans, but no, it's everything is nature. So, and in nature there is like a lot. There's animals and all kind of plants, all kind of species, and humans as well. But it's within nature. So that recognition, I think that will start a lot of people. They wanna or maybe also live in the city for 6 years, 6 months a year, for example, or in the winter or a certain period, and then the other 6 months live in the rural areas. It can also be maybe both. That's also what I feel.
Yeah, so that need to get back to nature is going to be a big pull, even if people haven't been living with nature as part of their lives. I think that's a very good point. Now, we've got some questions from the floor, from the delegates. The first one is from Jessica, and she's asking, what opportunities and innovations are young people bringing to rural areas in your countries? And I think I'm going to start with you, Anna, because I know you're very involved in technology with what you do within your job.
Creo que, bueno, en este caso conozco la apicultura muy de cerca.
In this case, I do know apiculture, so innovations are going to foster connection. I think creativity is going to allow us new technologies that are going to adapt to all the different ecosystems where we live. And we're not going to have second-hand or imitations. We're going to have first-hand designed technologies for people in rural areas, for example, to improve the connection between producer and consumer. This is traceability and the blue chain, knowing where do produce come from. Maybe organizations or rural companies can gather more information about what's happening in the ecosystem. For example, in beehive, it's very important to know the variety of endemic species of all the trees that you have in that territory. Before, it was rather complex to be capable to measure that and measure the impact. I try to speak slowly so that I can be understood. So the access to that information allows us, in this case, for a great deal of creativity for people living in rural areas and for people living in cities. I also do think that small-scale farmers, and in Latin America, the fair trade movement needs that technology too. Not only connectivity as one of the changes that could actually take place in rural areas.
Sorry, unmute myself. That's a very interesting answer. I'm going to ask the same question of DJ. You know, you're a very entrepreneurial guy. What are your thoughts on what opportunities and innovations young people bringing to rural areas in your countries?
I see. One thing I organized a year ago was kind of a masterclass. So we let like a lot of companies, they have a question, like a challenge, something they cannot work on, or that holds them back. And what we see that young people, especially and I don't want to, it's not black and white, of course, but a lot of young people, they tend to have just a different perspective already embedded in us. There's this, and it's for some it's more than others, but embedded in us, this is like sense of we are less polarized, so we don't see things black and white. It's not like one or the other. It can be both. It can be something, and that gives really a different perspective sometimes. I look for an option, like for example, a lot of, especially farmers, they think, or I have to be a big farmer and deliver to only to a big supermarket, and then it's big scale. There's not a lot of people working. That doesn't give a lot of jobs. Also, doesn't provide a lot of maybe for the local ecosystems. And then other people think, or I have to be a small scale farmer and deliver to small scale sellers and sell my products local. But maybe you can do both. It's like a very logical thinking for a lot of young people. That's just an example to see that really the mindset is different, and that brings different perspectives on challenges, which brings different ideas. And I think there's a lot of power in the youths, and then the youths also tend to be less thinking of it's not possible or this is not possible, and they think more in possibilities. And of course there is a physical world, there's a reality which has rules, and there is all these limitations. Yes, they are there, but don't start there, please. Start with the possibilities, and that's really when the inspiration and the creativity come, and that's a very important thing that the young people have to bring. And then of course we need everybody, and then all people can guide us, and on a positive way. So not negative, like no, it's not possible, or I've been there. Yeah, you've been there, but another time, another place. Everything changed all the time. So use that energy. Don't let it go to waste. Let it flourish and come to let it come to concrete ideas and concrete systems.
Yeah, it's a very good answer.
Yeah.
The energy of youth and the can-do attitude is so important, isn't it? And rural places need to embrace that. Anya, what do you think about what opportunities and innovations young people are bringing to rural areas in all of the countries that you're representing in your role?
I would say this aspect of sustainable development, going back to nature and preserving nature and being more in line with nature, and as well with fewer inputs, getting more out in terms of, with using technology, not needing to work 15, 20 hours a day as usually older farmers would do to get the same output at the end. So how to use technology to kind of be more productive in a way, and also to be more mindful with nature, and to be more sustainable. And I think that this aspect of being more aware of the climate change, of changes that are happening within technology, within the society, or how we perceive things. This is for me the biggest innovation that young people are bringing to rural areas. So kind of in a way going back to their roots, but still changing the concept. So it's more nature friendly, it's more people friendly, and it has a vision to the future. So how can we do things to sustain us now, but still not use the resources for future generations? And I think this is why it is important that young people have their own space in rural areas and are able to co-create the decisions that are made there.
Yeah, that's so true. Making the most, and your generation is so good at recognizing what the environment has to offer and how it needs to be preserved and enhanced, and that gives me great hope for the future. Fionn, is there anything you want to add to that point?
I think it's been really well covered. I like the way DJ said, start with the possibilities. And I think there is so much possibility in the minds of young people, but it's often the structures that are in place, maybe the frameworks that are not there to allow them to unleash those possibilities. And whether we're looking at reverse mentoring or partnering with older or younger at heart farmers or businesses or decision makers, or whether we're looking for young people to completely rip up the rule book and be allowed to start afresh. I think we've seen time and time again government-led initiatives, let's say across Europe, that's kind of policy area that I focus on in this area, that haven't been as successful as hoped. And I think what DJ is saying, start with the possibilities. Why maybe this is what is needed to allow young people to really and truly, and I mean, let young people take the driving seat, maybe have someone more experienced in the passenger seat next to them, absolutely. But I think we haven't seen change happen with this repeated approach, similar approach. So for those possibilities to be unleashed, I think it's time, as DJ said, don't start with the constraints, start with the possibilities, and let's see where we can go from there. If not in 2021, when can we do that?
That's a great rallying call, Fionn. I'm going to move now on to some of the endemic problems in rural areas for young people. And there's two questions, one from Alana and one from John. Alana's is, have any of you had any experience of or views of getting better public transport? She says she's 22 in a rural UK setting, and she's craving bike lanes to be installed as people drive too fast, and I'd rather not drive. And John's question is, how can we find a way for young people to find affordable housing in rural areas? So those two big issues. And Fionn, I'm going to start with you on that.
Sure. So I've just finished speaking to a lot of rural young people about this, exactly about public transport and housing and many other things. It was rather striking in our discussions to see that young people across the board just said, can the bus turn up on time? It was very hard for them to kind of think further beyond, or think beyond driving or sharing cars or getting the bus, because the infrastructure that's there currently is just so terrible. And so I think that really shows a sign of public transport in Wales. So this was a piece of research done in Wales. And there is a need, I think, to have a wider consultation on public transport that's fit for young people in rural areas. One of the other key issues was the bus, if it did turn up, was often coming on a scheduling time that wasn't geared towards, and therefore not practical for young people. And I think this comes back again to what Anya was saying in terms of young people not having the space to be able to influence these decisions that are being made. But generally in Wales, the comments were that great if we could get electric buses, great if we could have cycle paths to link us, but actually, first of all, can we have a bus turn up on time at a good time for us? So I think lots of work to be done.
Sorry, I'm on mute. Anya, in other parts of Europe, what are you seeing? Does that resonate with what you're hearing?
Yeah, what Fionn said, it really kind of collected what we experienced a few years ago when through the process of the EU Youth Dialogue, we created the European Youth Goals and Youth Goal 6, moving rural youth forward. I was a part of the group that created this youth goal, and we all had the same experience. And based on the consultations with more than 50,000 young people over Europe, it was the same. Yeah, the issues of, you know, just being able to reach a certain destination that is outside of the I don't know, one kilometer of your home is really really hard. But yeah, just having the bus turning up on time or things like that. But if I can go to the second question regarding the housing, one of the things that I saw in one of the villages in Slovenia was that the group of young people created their own housing cooperative. So they gathered themselves and they managed to collect some money, managed to get some funding from one of the EU funds, and they opened a cooperative and they bought a house together and turned it into a cooperative. Now they're adding some parts where they can sustain themselves. Growing different food and things like that. As well, you know, this aspect of cooperatives can be one of the opportunities how young people can access housing in their areas, but it is something that it's really, really a topic that is not on the mind of decision makers. In Slovenia, housing is a big topic. Everyone talks about it, but people always talk about apartments in the cities. Those are lacking. And if when I was the president of the Youth Council, I was the only one, and I'm happy that I managed to convince some media and decision makers that they realize that there's housing issue also in rural areas, because we always get this kind of boomerang thrown back to us, but there's so many empty houses in rural areas. You know, you cannot say that there is issue. But when you dig deeper, you realize that these houses are either so old that no one can live in them, or are placed in places where there's nothing there, and there aren't kind of attractive for young people to move there because they're, you know, as we already said, issues with public transport, with labor market, etc. So it is a topic that we still need to talk about, and decision makers need to be aware that not only in cities we have these issues, but as well in rural areas.
And DJ, we'll stay in Europe and then we'll move to Latin America.
If you look to transport, yeah, I'm from the Netherlands, and there it's pretty well organized. Of course, but the distances are much shorter, and we don't have hills, no mountains, so it's flat, so it's much easier. We have a lot of waterways, so in the past they use the waterways, so always, yeah, so they find way to use the landscape. But now it's really good organized. Even in the tiniest villages, there is a couple buses a day, maybe every another hour or something. So that's really good. For a long time now I have a car, but for a long time I didn't have a car, and then I had to go to farmers sometimes. I could reach almost everything with the bus and the train. And then on the last bus stop or train stop, there's often there's a new system. You can rent like bicycles or bikes. They can do the last part even though you don't have to walk. Good system. with different challenges, we'd say.
Thank you, DJ. And Anna.
Well, so looking at the transport question, those issues. In Latin America, particularly in Argentina, we have to deal with big distances. One of my favorite journeys is 900 kilometers long in one day. And then you just sleep there and you come back. 900 kilometers again. So that's quite an adventure. But it's an adventure because of the nature that you get to experience. I think that nature has remained partly because of the level of infrastructure that exists. But in the small towns, you really don't have public transport. It's very infrequent. People have to find ways to get to different places under their own steam. So I'd like to raise an interesting point, something that's happening in Latin America. Often, we don't have many options or much support from the government or rights for infrastructure in rural areas. So what happens? Local actors or cooperatives or companies or producers organizations that we work with, and they're kind of allies, I'd have to say. There's a low population density there. We are the local actors who really have to take the bull by the horns. We have to come up with our own solutions, and that's an opportunity as well for creativity. We can show some leadership to deal with these issues. So in our cooperative, we're doing a logistics circuit, so we can go and collect honey from our hives. And at the same time, we take around food and basic goods like a little mini supermarket. And this lowers costs for the families we work with in these villages. It's amazing, very interesting.
Thank you, Anna. That's very interesting. I'm going to move on to employment. So there's a couple of very good questions, one from Georgia and one from James. The one from Georgia is, do the panelists have some examples of value-based businesses being set up in their areas, particularly any set up by younger people? And James's question is, what advice would you give to a rural business looking to design a job role with the view of attracting young people? And can it be done to compete with and to draw talent from the cities? So how can businesses, value-based businesses, be developed? Are there any examples? And how can they be used to ensure that young people are employed in rural places? And Anya, I'm going to ask you that question first.
Yeah, I just not long ago, I found out that there's a house that basically it was an old farm. They're building in an area that in Slovenia that is really close to the Croatian border, and nothing is happening there basically because most of the industry was moved. And they're a young couple that traveled the world, and then they came back home and bought this old farm. And they're now, trying to self-sustain them, and it's linked to tourism. And this is my line of studies. I study tourism, and I'm doing my master thesis on tourism in rural areas. And they're basing everything on being able to provide, food that is grown in the garden where the tourists will woke up in the morning and realize that they're in nature. And they're also creating this business to present this kind of lifestyle, being in line with nature, to people that are in urban areas. So when they return back to the cities, they appreciate homemade food more, home produced food, And when they are, in their houses or apartments in the cities, they always have this memory of their visit to that place. And when they go to the store, they won't buy a product that is really, made in a factory, but they will look for this kind of company that is linking, food, tourism, and just this sense of kind of educating consumers in how to behave.
That's a great example. And DJ, and I was just thinking about Imagro being a really good example of a business that is set up rurally, employs young people, and is very much a values-based business. I wondered if you could tell us a bit about that business and also the principles of setting up a rural values-based business.
Yes, of course. Yeah, Imagro is in Ottersum, a small village in the Netherlands. And what you see in the Netherlands, also some villages are a lot of youth is moving away. But at some villages, there seems to be still a lot of young people. And then I asked what's happening there. And Ottersum is a small village, less than 2,000 people. And it's a good example because Imagro started the business. They started as kind of a marketing company for agricultural companies, but they tend to look both the workers, so they give job on people in the area. That's what they prefer. So they rather go for somebody from the village or in the next village than somebody from a city, or really to stimulate the local ecosystems. And they work together. So they for lunch they give they have now 40 people working. So it's kind of also growing. They have a lot of acquisition, a lot of work, but then they want to have a lunch. So they ask in the village, like, hey, is there a young girl or a young guy who can make for 40 people lunch every day? And then you can already, so by being a caterer in a rural area, you can already earn this money because we have this. So they kind of putting out a lot of questions which stimulate youth. Same as one of their buildings, they want to have it's a creative space. So they said, like, okay, once a month, every Friday, we give it to the young people in the village. And then the young people, it's the whole day for them. So they can do dinners or other festivities or parties. It doesn't matter. It's for you that one day, this building. And then everything you earn, that goes in a separate box, and that's be used for the community back. So it's really, really clever, and it's just some examples. And then on the other side, but it's not only Imagro, it's on the other side you have a bakery, and they also have a museum. So they're showing a lot of old stuff at the same time. There is festivals going on already for a couple of years that everybody's looking forward to. Oh, like next month we have this festival, and people are waiting for it. It's really about having a nice environment and the sense of doing it together and finding smart ways to stimulate people to enroll or to get them engaged in things. Engagement is so important, and there's like the magical word they always say is oi oi. Maybe you remember because you were there, Jane. It's like only if I own it. If people always say not in my backyard, but only if I own it. So if I own it, if I feel ownership about something, it doesn't matter, then I care about it. Then I care about it, and I put energy in it, and that's really, really important. So engagement, and a sense of ownership. I think that's very, very important, and that that makes or break it. And if you see it really on the Netherlands, if there are some villages and then people don't feel they have a voice, then there's no only if I own it, and there's no empowerment there. There's no ownership, and it's just how it works. I think, I guess, very important.
I think everybody will take that away. Only if I own it.
Yeah.
And Anna, what about you've got a very values-based business or organization, cooperative. Could you tell us a little bit more about that and how it attracts young people, and also what kind of jobs there are for young people?
Bueno, lo que suelo pensar es que
What I
cuanto
normally think is that the more diverse, the more creativity. This is something we learned. Diversity is good, per se. So every productive system, we talk about coffee, honey, and any other product in our area, needs sustainability. It needs to be sustainable for producers as well, small-scale producers or else, so that diversity can be developed and the value chain can be increased too. If we just consider the product as a commodity, then we are into a toxic circle. What do we believe in? Which is our philosophy in our cooperative? If we want to add value, we need to create diversity and opportunity. For example, the honey, the jar, it needs a design, a name. We need to acknowledge that product. That is a first step. But of course, I think too that diversification within a productive system is something very important, and it's one of the potentials in youth. Youth, elderly, and women, everyone. So if we want a strong a strong productive organization with diversity, and then the rest of things will be able to work too. At the very same time, diversity means that there has to be a great amount of dialogue between the producers' organizations and also the private sector. There has to be the dialogue that allows a more inclusive platform. This is what I call collective impact, because the problem does not belong to the youth only. It is not about what we do. It's what we do in relationship with other species. This is what Nietzsche said. We are just another piece of the puzzle. So I do think that this is a possibility to innovate in our companies.
Thank you, Anna. And Fionn.
Sorry, I got a little bit distracted watching the clock running down and feeling really sad that we haven't had a chance to really cover a lot of the discussions. I think if I may pull in a couple of the other questions I've seen around education and skills, the discussions I've been having point towards young people feeling that they aren't leaving school with the skills that will future-proof them, future-proof their careers, and they see that they're not getting it in school, they're not seeing it perhaps around them, they're not seeing these innovative businesses, they're not seeing these different kinds of jobs, and so they feel that their futures are not there. If I quote, and this came up a lot in our discussions, there's not really an option to stay. And that saddens me so massively, because we talk about bringing talent to rural areas, and there is so much already there that we're not nurturing and that we are losing. And I think, as everyone else has said, that the solution lies in diversity and lies in collaboration and cooperation. I saw a comment from someone that farming traditionally in the UK hasn't been very cooperative, and it sadly hasn't for a very long time. And I think that is key, this change of behaviour and this change of mindset that DJ alluded to at the beginning of the discussion is really going to be essential. I think if I was to look at it at a Wales-based level, we really need to bring cooperation and collaboration above competition. And there's so much to learn from the fair trade system, for example. I'm a huge believer in working together. And I think Anna just showing that producers working together, but also working together to bring their essential needs to their communities and finding the ways of symbiotically working together. So I think education does need a revamp, and our Future Generations Commissioner in Wales, I think, would definitely agree. We need to future-proof our education systems, but we also need to allow young people to lead. Again, coming back to this, but I really think that value mindset of working together rather than working against each other lies in our future generations.
Thank you, Fiona, and thank you for picking up a question that we haven't been able to cover nearly quite a few of them. So I'm going to suggest if the panelists are happy, we should book a meeting room for maybe Tuesday evening. So the same time on Tuesday, would that suit everybody? 9 p.m. GMT. We'll ask the organisers if we can book a meeting room. But I'm going to ask Russ if he could sum up our discussions before we close for this evening.
Thank you very much, everyone. That was so fantastic, and I'm sad we're running out of time. And I just very quickly try and capture what was discussed. The thing that comes to the top of my list is sort of the energy that we've seen here tonight, and perspective. I think this young person's perspective that all four of you have shared so well, it's really got me thinking, gosh, there's another way to think about things. And that's so important as we tackle challenges for the future. What else do we hear about? How innovations can lead to connections, how we can think differently about rural versus urban, being values driven with the businesses that we're part of and movements we're part of, how we can co-create our rural areas and society for the future, how we can rethink journeys and see them as an experience, not necessarily so much of a hassle, learning from other countries like the Netherlands, and the importance of diversity and ownership of whatever it is that we're creating. I love that. Oi, that's great. I'm going to use that again. So I hope that's just, I needed a word cloud really to properly illustrate all the wonderful things that have been said, but really great. Thank you, everyone.
Thank you very much, Russ, and thank you everybody on the panel and all of the delegates. If you would like to come back and join us with a beer on Tuesday, what I'll do is I'll capture all of the questions and we can have a longer discussion about some of the things that we didn't touch on this evening. But thank you all to the panelists and to the organisers and to the Oxford Real Farming Conference. You have done an amazing job, so namaste.